Hello, everyone. We'll be starting in a bit. If you would like to say hello, if you could just write in the chat box who you are, where are you joining us from, that would be great. It seems there's a technical problem with chat. We're just going to finish it. Just going to see what's wrong there. Right. So I will figure out how to chat. Meanwhile, thank you, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you're joining us from. It's great to see already so many people here. Today, we are very excited. This is the 15th edition of the Publishing Critical Work PDW series that CMS InTouch organizes. This series is a part of our larger endeavor to support, nurture, and mostly bring together the critical management scholar community. So it's really wonderful to see everyone together. And also today we are very delighted to welcome the editorial team from Journal of Management Studies, JMS. I have a personal story here to share because I'm very excited to have the JMS team. When I started as a PhD student way back in 2013, I started to explore, my PhD explored climate change responses. And at the time, the climate change had not really become a very mainstream management topic. And there was an article in JMS by Gail Whiteman and her team on planetary bodies. And that completely changed my outlook at organization and management research. And more importantly, it gave me credibility as a management scholar to say that, listen, this is a mainstream topic. So JMS has played a very important part in my scholarly work. So I'm very, very excited to have the team here. Before I hand over to the team to share about JMS in general, and also about publishing both empirical and conceptual papers, a couple of housekeeping points that I would like to share. We have a Q&A function, the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box, and some of us from the CMS InTouch team will make sure that your question gets to the panel and it's answered. Please feel free to put your questions anytime during the webinar. So you can put them as and when you have any question, please feel free to put them. Now, we are also on Twitter. So if you would like to tweet, if you would like to live tweet about this webinar, please feel free to do so. Our Twitter handle is CMS InTouch. So those are the only two things I have. And I promise I'm going to fix the chat function as well. Without any delays, I would hand over to the team from JMS. Thank you.
Good. So let me make a start then, and also introduce the others. So welcome, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Thanks also for the nice introduction and the personal story, which was very good to hear. So I'm Christopher Rickard. I'm one of the general editors at JMS, and I have the pleasure to be here with you today with my colleague Gatrell. from University of Liverpool, and Thomas Roulet from University of Cambridge. What we thought today is we give you as much as possible time for your questions and Q&A session. So we will be kind of fairly brief, just give you a snapshot of what JMS is about in relation to CMS, and then start with questions. So let me just make a brief start. You probably all know the journal, so I can skip kind of some of the more generic points. We have manuscript preparation, author guidelines, and all of that on the website. But what is probably important for you to know, so JMS is a general management journal, which means we basically, and I think this is the best way to describe that, we basically cater or are open to any submissions that broadly fall under the umbrella of what the Academy of Management generally looks for. So you probably know all these divisions and interest groups, such as organization management theory, social issues and management, and critical management studies. So it's one of the many topics that we care about and are open to publish, which means at the same time that we're actually very proud to have a strong foothold, we believe so, at least in the CMS community. So we have great works, including some of the JMS classics that you may know on critical theory and critical management studies more broadly. And that reflects our stance that we deliberately want to be open to what we may call non-mainstream methods and theory, right? Which I think this distinguishes us greatly from journals such as AMR or AMJ. So when you submit critical work, which is often based on or reflective of non-mainstream theories and methods, in many cases, or maybe even in most of the cases, our reviewers are to some extent familiar with that, right? So when we get a CMS paper, we of course look for reviewers who are somewhat familiar with either the method or the theory or both, so that you won't need to argue kind of against, let's say, a mainstream scholar in a way. At the same time, what's very important for those who intend to submit critical work to us is that keep in mind who is our audience. We're not a journal that is specifically kind of carrying the conversation of critical scholars, but we include any kind of conversation. So when you write your manuscript and you frame your contributions and all of that, keep in mind that you're talking to a general management audience. So the message that needs to come across in your paper is basically, why would your research, your critical research, your CMS-inspired research, why would this be of interest to a non-CMS scholar? That's what I think what makes the paper good, because it makes it accessible and comprehensible by a broader audience. And I think it's, in fact, I have also published some CMS work in the past based on my PhD work and other work. And something that bothered me a little bit about CMS research is that I found it too often that scholars are talking to each other within kind of a small or somewhat small group of other CMS scholars. They just talk to each other, and I'm maybe exaggerating a bit here now, but that's not what we want to support. What we want to support is that actually critical work gets out there and reaches the mainstream. But to reach the mainstream, you need to talk to the mainstream explicitly and argue and explain to the mainstream why your research is relevant. What I suggest to do in that respect is also that look at previous critical research published in JMS. So we have a lot to offer. In my tenure as editor, I had almost a handful of papers which I accepted for publication, which I would categorize as decisively CMS or critical. They did a great job. Look for these papers. They're easy to find on our website, and see try to learn from these authors. So when it comes to kind of writing for a broader general management audience, I think there's no need to reinvent the wheel there. Where you want to reinvent the wheel is with your message, your contribution, of course. But how you convey that, my advice is typically to look at some best practices and try to learn from authors who have already conveyed the message in a very accessible manner, and then try to take away insights from this for your own new and original message. These are just a few kind of ideas I would like to share. So in general, JMS is very much open to critical work. I would hand over to my colleague Carolyn to add and complement what I have said. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chris. What I'm going to talk about is very specifically review papers in JMS. We encourage people to send review papers. I think we've increased the numbers that we publish over recent years. And I believe that CMS scholars are in a really good position to prepare and submit a review to JMS because of their critical approach. What we're looking for in a review is obviously something that reviews comprehensively an area of concern. We're looking for something that's really up to date. So as an example, I got a really interesting review that covered management research in the 1950s, but it didn't go beyond that, and it didn't link it with anything that's happening more recently. So that was something where I suggested that further work was needed. And it needs to be in an area that's mature enough to warrant a review. So something that starts off about, this is something that nobody's written about, but it's really important, immediately doesn't get it off to a start that's going to be attractive to reviewers, because what they want to see is something that's actually reflecting a rich body of research in a given area. So that's what we're looking for, is that the basics of a review. We're also looking for a review that is reflective, that is critical, that perhaps takes a step back, perhaps looks at reviewing an area of concern from a new or a different angle. So the kinds of review that we are less interested in are the sorts of review where somebody's actually put it through a research package and they're able to say, well, this is a very popular area, 30% of the journals look at this, 40% look at that, and 20% don't look at it at all. That's not what we're looking for, as I'm sure you know. We're looking for something that produces a narrative. We're quite broad in the type of review that it is. It could be a systematic review where you've gone very thoroughly through all the search engines and looked at what there is. It could be a narrative review where you're drawing on experience or past experience. It could be an integrative review where you're actually pulling together lots of different ideas from different disciplines, perhaps. There's a pluralism in terms of the type of methods. However, what's common to all is that the review makes a statement that leads us to some kind of theoretical contribution in the area of concern. And there are lots of interesting ones that have been done quite recently. So there's something about serendipity and sense making. Alfredo de Massis has done a review about family business and restructuring and saying those two things, people hadn't looked at them together. Before I became a general editor, I got one published on fatherhood, and I looked at, with my co-authors, Jamie Ladge and Gary Powell, we looked at how we might understand fatherhood in the context of management and organisation, but we drew upon literatures from different bodies, from health and sociology, and we gave a different angle to the way that management studies had previously looked at fatherhood, and that, I think, is probably what was attractive to the editors and the reviewers, and that's what got the paper in. So some handy hints. It sounds really obvious about paying attention to the author guidelines. It's not uncommon that we would receive something that might be a nice paper, but that's been crafted from a different journal, perhaps AMR, and the authors haven't really done very much to frame it for JMS. And that's really important, because for JMS, it's a conversation. So we would be looking for a paper or review paper that perhaps linked into a conversation. Perhaps you're saying this is the conversation, but we take a different view, or they haven't considered this. So have a look and see if there's a conversation in the journal about what you would like to talk about. And that might be very precisely in your area, or it might be a bit more broadly, but that's really worth looking at, reflecting on what's being published and how you're building on the conversation. Making sure that you give the overview of the relevant literatures. It's very easy to get so involved in the conceptual side of things that you kind of miss out a chunk of the literature. And that's something it's got to be both. It's got to make a conceptual contribution and come up with a new angle that perhaps people haven't thought about before. At the same time, it's really important that a literature review does actually review all the literatures in the area, even if you pick out one that you're going to focus on. And I think there are a couple of papers that would be helpful maybe, and I will stick those in the chat later. I was a part of a team with Corinne Post, and we looked at developing reviews. And there's also a paper that I wrote with Dermot Breslin about, we called it the Minor Prospect Continuum. And it's really looking at how you might position yourself as a reviewer. So you might be mining, going into an area where already there's been lots of stuff written about this particular area and perhaps several reviews on it, and you're going to just carve out your little niche. Or you might be a prospector. You might be saying, this is an area where there have been things written about, but nobody's drawn them together. Nobody's really done a review, and this is what we're going to do. So it's a bit new, it's a bit different. And at the minor end of the scale, if you're going into a mine where there's lots of people busy working on the same area, it's important to differentiate what's original about what you do. If you're the prospector going into the area where actually it's a territory that people haven't really written about, it might be something that's important, for example, in health studies, and you can see how it relates to management, but nobody's really talked about it. You need to make this very strong argument about why that's relevant for JMS and our readers. Which I think leads me on to the next point, and Chris touched on this. This is a general management journal. So you might be doing a review or indeed a paper on an area that's very important to you, that's very well known in a particular circle, and you would need to deal with the specifics of that, but in the context of the more general management setting. So if you were doing something about, say, women's voice, you might need to look at setting that more broadly in the context of gender studies. That would just be one example. Really important that the review paper delivers on its promises and fulfills its aims. So worth just checking what you've promised to do and what you actually do in the end. And I think for JMS, two things. One is JMS reviewers are looking for methodological rigor. So even if what you've done is a review, you didn't collect any data, it's really important to know how you went about that. What did you do? Where did you search? Why did you make the decisions that you made? And that might be that you're actually looking at a long career and you're drawing upon things from your career, but you're also bringing in new papers. Or it might be that you're an early career researcher, you've done a huge systematic literature review, and you have actually drawn upon things that are from databases. Both of those approaches would be legitimate, but you need to explain how you've done it. And you need to explain that you've covered all the literature, and it's easy to miss things out. So in doing a huge systematic review, and again, I'll give you an example, looking at men and work, for example, there was a review that looked at different approaches to men and work, but there was actually something that was missed out. And I actually suggested those people might want to revisit the paper, and they may well return it at some point to JMS, because sometimes we do look at, we reject papers, sometimes revise and resubmit, accept. Occasionally when we reject papers, if we think there's promise, we might suggest to the authors, we'll take it away and have another think about it and decide if you want to have another go. I think the issue there was they were early career researchers. They'd done a really good systematic review, but somehow they'd missed out a really key area. And that would say something about working with somebody who's experienced in the field, because they would have known that to look at it immediately. They would have seen what's missing. The other perspective, if it's something that's very concerned with what you're doing and it's a narrative review, you'd need to make really sure that you'd looked beyond that at the wider field, so that you haven't missed any important research or papers that have come in more lately. I mean, I could go on forever, and I think I probably won't, but I think that really does give an overview of reviews, and my best advice would be to have a little look at them in the journal, but that as critical management scholars, my view is you're in a really good position to submit a review for JMS, because already you have an approach that investigates the taken for granted, that looks at things from a different angle. So it gives you a real opportunity to do a review that goes beyond just saying, here's the literature, but you're actually looking at what it means, what might be the theoretical implications of what you're doing, and perhaps providing yourself or others with a strategic platform saying, look, I've reviewed the field. This is what it says. This is the angle I've taken, and this is the area for future research. So it might be that you yourself might follow up with the future research, or it gives other people an opportunity because they've had the chance to think differently about the field, having read your review. I think that's probably enough from me. While we're talking, I'll dig out these 2 links and put them in the chat, and I'll now pass on to Thomas.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much. So I'm the co-editor for GMS Essays, which is the dedicated section on essays, and GMS Essays was one of the first academic journal to accept and consider essays, and it has a very, I would say, peculiar, specific, and narrow expectation of what we consider to be an essay. So I'm going to try to explain what it includes and what it doesn't include, especially because I would say that every journal that has an essay section has slightly different expectation. So we do receive, essays that potentially have been rejected in other journals and they don't fit a GMSA. So it's quite important to think about what are our specific expectations. And so let me explain a little bit. We expect people to provide a call for action, meaning something that is relevant for management scholars, that get them to think or act in a different way. We want those call for action to be interesting and original. Very often we receive, even for papers for proposals that fit with what we expect, they don't suggest anything that is very new or something that we have already covered in previous GMSAs. And I would say one of the most important things to think about when you consider submitting your proposal for a GMSA, I'm going to talk about the process. But first, at GMSA, you submit a 300-word proposal that we then, invite for a full essay or we reject. So it's low investment, but usually it means that a lot of those also get rejected because they don't fit what we expect. And so the main criteria to think about whether what you are trying to write is good for GMSAs is that we do not want papers that develop theories. We do not want papers that are using empirical material. So if it's an empirical paper, if it's a theory paper, or if it's a review paper or an agenda setting paper, it is not for GMSAs. So 90% of our rejection are papers that are either empirical pieces, theory pieces, or agenda setting. This definitely is out of the remit of GMSAs, and usually we tell authors to submit, as a normal paper for GMSAs. And the third element is that we expect essays to be deeply personal, to be subjective, to build upon the narrative of the writers. We want to hear your stories. And it is, and this is the reason why I'm here today, is that very often we publish essays from CMS, or critical management scholars, because we believe that critical management scholars very often have something to say that is relevant to management scholars in general, and really built upon personal narratives and personal stories. So CMS is particularly well positioned in our field to give voice to strong essays for GMSAs. And another criteria, I'm going to post all of this in the chat. Another criteria is that we expect very little use of academic references. If you have more than 4 or 5 references, probably your paper is not a good fit for GMSAs. And last one thing is also we are quite keen to hear from junior scholars and scholars from geographically and socially marginalized communities. Let me just post that in the chat so you have those different elements. In terms of process, we expect first a submission of a 300-word proposal that is then reviewed by 3 people. We are 2 GMS sales editors, Trish Ray and myself, and one A with staff Fenschmidt right now. We will all look at the proposal and we decide whether we should invite this for a full essay or we should reject it. And so we invite for full essays. You have 3-4 months to write the full essay, which is 3,000 words, no more. We then go for a revision process. Usually we make comments, and there are 2-3 rounds of revising the essays, and then the essay is published. So again, the process is 300-word proposal reviewed by 3 people, which are the 2 GMSA's editor and the A. And the full essay is then reviewed, and we do revisions around the full essay. The full essay can still be rejected, you know. So sometimes we invite for a full essay. It's not quite what we expect. It doesn't fulfill our criteria that I, just talked about, and so we sometimes reject at this stage. And I can give you, a little bit of publication stats if you are interested. So in 2023, we invited 10% of the proposals we got for full essays, and roughly we accept 2 to 4 essays a year. Right now, a little bit more. So we are more selective with full essay invitation, but I think we're going to accept probably a few more full essays this year. We have quite a few in the pipeline right now. But some people think, it might be easier to publish an essays. I would say it is not, because, as you can tell, roughly it's 10% that is invited for full essay proposal, and then there's still probably rejection. But this is a misleading figure, because as I said, 90% of what we reject at this stage are people who haven't attended those sorts of beautiful sessions and send us empirical paper or theory paper. And we are like, this really doesn't fit. This is very clear on the website. We don't want theory paper. We don't want agenda setting paper. We don't want empirical papers. So, just by knowing those rules, knowing that we expect your narrative, your story to be in, already you give yourself a greater chance to get in. And so most people who get rejected are people, who haven't attended those sorts of sessions, haven't got a good idea of what is expected. And the best way to get a sense of what we want is to read what we have recently published. And I'm talking not what we have published, at the start of GMSAs, although this is useful, but the GMSAs, remit has evolved a little bit, also because there are more essay sections in many journals, but also because we have gotten more precise in what we expect, because we got more submissions, so we need to be clear about what is a good GMSA. And let me share with you the 3 last GMSAs we accepted, which are really good representation of what we want. And those 3 essays are most recently one essay on patriarchy and the business school by Andy Protero, a paper about the reviewing process and the challenges of the reviewing process, and then another essay on what is it to be a sustainability scholar. And those 3 essays, they are great at using personal narratives. They are making an important point. What we want is things that make us think and approach things in a different way. All of those essays, they really triggered important debates in our fields. The one on sustainability was, covered by the FT, considered by deans. This is the sort of things that we want, to trigger. Okay. And I'm gonna stop there. I hope this is helpful. People are free, to contact Trish and myself. Whenever they feel like they have an idea, they want to discuss it. We will tell you this is a fit, this doesn't fit. Or you can send a 300-word proposal. It's low investment. But, do think about whether your idea fits GMSAs. But we are keen, to develop essays that, are provocative and cover important call for actions for our fields. And I'm going to stop here.
Hello. Well, I'm going to join you on behalf of the CMS Touch team and say thank you. For where we've got to. I've got a question of my own, which I'm going to hold in reserve. But we've already got one question in the chat, so maybe I might open up the conversation with you. And you can sort of decide who's best placed to answer this. Anonymous attendee says, "Hi, thanks so much for this webinar." And there are two questions. Are there any examples of review papers where authors have done a review based on their experience and not on a systematic literature review? And secondly, would a paper like this be better for point counterpoints? I wonder if that is something that either or any three of you would like to speak to.
Shall I start, Chris? And then, so I'm trying to think. There would be papers where people have. So even the paper that I did on fatherhood, I think we do acknowledge in the methods section that we are scholars who've worked in the area for a long time. At the same time, we also undertook a systematic literature review. So it's both. It's not an autoethnography. It is a full and comprehensive review, but we're acknowledging that our experience in the area influenced what we wrote about, because you can't unknow what you know. But we're also acknowledging that there might be things that we didn't know about, even though we've been writing the area for quite a long time. So we did a really comprehensive systematic review as well. So that's a paper with myself, Jamie Ladge and Gary Powell about fathers and employment. Chris or Thomas, I don't know if you've got any other nice examples.
I don't have an example that comes to mind, but our point counterpoint format was mentioned. So maybe I briefly address that. So that is another paper format that we have at JMS. So we have the regular papers, which is the umbrella for the empirical, conceptual, and review papers, which have the typical manuscript length, 12,000 words. We look for theoretical contribution, and that's kind of our standard paper. We have the JMS test, which Thomas talked about, and we have the point counterpoints debates. These work by not by invitation only, but by ad hoc proposal. So you would not find that through the regular submission route, but we're looking for short proposals that can be sent to us at any time. The idea of the point counterpoint is that you address and shed light on a major controversy within our field. So it's not like, well, there's a research gap and scholars don't agree on how to fill it. That would be kind of too narrow for a point counterpoint. An example is, and this is not an actual example, take research on corporate social responsibility or corporate sustainability. There's a major controversy whether voluntary kind of market-based mechanisms or regulatory kind of regulation-based mechanisms are more effective in enhancing sustainability. That will be a major unresolved controversy where we have a huge or a large number of scholars on either side of the controversy. That will be something where we would say, well, this might be a candidate for a point counterpoint. And the format is slightly different. I don't have the perfect idea now how a PCP on a CMS related topic could be at the moment, but also as what Thomas said, have a look at the existing point counterpoints. We have one on kind of Western versus non-Western or indigenous theories, for example, which is very interesting. We have something on the future of the corporation, lots of very interesting things, and seek inspiration about how these authors kind of teased out the controversy and didn't necessarily resolve it because it's typically too big, but at least point towards kind of ways forward how to deal and engage with that controversy.
I wonder if it's worth just talking about JMS says, but not necessarily from a review perspective, but from the personal perspective. Andy's lovely paper, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the personal perspective is the central point of a GMSA. But the narrative, the personal narrative here in GMSAs is aimed at providing a call for action. That's what we expect. So not something that will contribute to a literature, but something that will contribute to how we think and approach our work as management scholars and management scholarship in general. So that's how we would think about personal elements, autoethnographical element into an essay.
Thank you. Thanks. We got another question come in. So mine is bumped down the list further. The question is an area such as meaningful work of interest at JMS, knowing that it is a relatively new area and there's not a massive empirical body of research, and not so little either, but it does have an accented body of controversial debate to engage with very critically. So the question about meaningful work and whether that is something you would see JMS publishing. Christopher?
I just accepted the paper today, which is broadly about meaningful work. So there is a clear yes, and I think yesterday or the day before yesterday, I don't recall, a paper was submitted to me, which I would handle, and I forwarded that to the reviewer. So it's a clear yes. I mean, we have the same expectations than for any other manuscript when it comes to novelty and originality of the theoretical contribution. But as I see, I mean, I'm not a meaningful work scholar, but it's a very interesting debate that resonates with a lot of management scholars. That's important for us, right? Will people read that? And I think, yes, they will, because there's a high number of people interested in that. Yeah, the challenge is to connect that a meaningful work literature, or to tease out a theoretical puzzle in that literature. And this can be from a critical point of view, it can be from a strategic management point of view, it can be from any point of view. What is the theoretical puzzle in the way we deal with, understand, conceptualize meaningful work? And why would that be relevant for a broader general management audience?
Thanks, and that's great news if the author whose manuscript you've accepted hasn't looked at their email but is on this call.
I don't know.
Thanks for sharing that news here. Another question then, if that's okay, and that's from Rafia Fayez, who says that I'm thrilled by JMS Says. I'm particularly inspired by Andrea Prothero's recent article, Me, the Patriarchy in the Business School. I'm eager to try to contribute, they write, but my own narrative as a Pakistani skilled migrant in Canada. But I lack publishing experience and have limited resources. I could not have attended AOM, for example. Could I find mentorship within JMS Says to guide me through this process? I wonder, you might answer that from your experience as editors, but also from your other networks as to where this colleague of ours might find some help.
I can take that.
Did you want to start with?
Well, we try as much as we can to support authors from broad horizons, and I can cite people who are quite distant, maybe from the Western perspective of writing research. So we try to be as supportive as we can. The core argument is to be able to, offer an argument that is sharp enough, so we can support people, but obviously there is a limit on our time. So we do try as much as we can, but we have to deal with 100 proposals a year. So there is quite a bit of work, especially at the essay. But if we believe in your idea, if we think it's a good idea, we do work with the author, quite seriously. To the point, in some of the rounds, we would, really comment directly on the Word document. So we are, as much as we can be developmental editor, and I can, cite cases where we have really worked quite hard with the authors to the point, we could probably list ourselves as co-authors. I'm joking, I'm exaggerating, but the idea is that we try to be developmental. If not, beyond, us as scholar, yes, the academy obviously cannot be attended by everybody, and that's why we have those, those meetings talking about what we expect, and we might do more of them. But now, you can also email us. We are always keen to hear from authors and discuss with authors and support them. There is support to get, for different networks as well. if you think about, I'm blanking on the name right now, but there are different networks for junior scholars from different parts of the world. And I think there is one that Vivek Sundarajan has started just now, which is based on another program, that was developed in India. It's all based on Zoom. People can access it from everywhere, and they get mentorship. And I've been involved in providing mentorship in this for years. So there are different initiatives. So I just, get on the mailing list, ensure that you follow all those mailing lists and that you can see mentoring programs that you can access. So yes, that's my recommendation.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Oh, Caroline, I jumped in across you.
I was just going to say, JMS does provide quite a lot of developmental PDWs and workshops. Some of them are in person, and we do try and hold them in different parts of the world, and some of them are online. So it's always worth just checking the JMS website to see what there is available.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm sure we would be delighted to help host one here through CMS InTouch with you as well, if that's helpful for people here. There's another anonymous attendee has asked around. I think I'm going to guess that they're an early career scholar, and says that the really nice examples you shared seem to be for more established scholars. Are there any obvious examples from early career scholars that you'd like to point towards, or some sort of pitfalls that early career scholars might fall into when writing in the essay format for the first time? I think that might go back to you again, Thomas.
So you mentioned GMSA, you shared all from established scholars. I would disagree. Two of the essays I mentioned are by junior people, so I don't know. I don't know what you consider a junior person, but someone with just out of their PhD for me is a junior person. So the Gorgi Krylef is a junior person. The sustainability scholarship essay is by a group of junior people. We also don't discriminate, if people are out of their PhD or years later, we do consider their essays, and if we believe they have a strong call for action, we also publish their work. Trying to think about what we have in the pipeline right now. There is a mix, but obviously it's, more senior scholars also come up with ideas. We just want to foster voices from more junior people. It's just how much of those voices do we get, and sometimes they also send us papers that are saying things we have already said in GMSAs, or that are not GMSAs. So in this sense, they don't fit the journals, but we do try as much as we can to encourage younger scholars, because we believe younger scholars usually, or junior scholars, come up with ideas and call for actions for management scholarships that are more unique, and come from a place where there is more to learn for the broader community. And myself, I can say that 10 years ago, less than 10 years ago, I wrote an essay which started when I was just out of my PhD. So I'm a good example, and now I did the GMSAs, but when I published it, I was a tenure track junior scholar.
Thanks, Thomas. I think Christopher was itching to get in.
Yeah. Now let me just add here how it is for regular paper. So in principle, I don't care who is the author of the paper, right? If it's a good paper, it will be accepted. If it's a bad paper, it will not be accepted. Whether the author is the most senior person ever and has 200,000 citations, the paper is not good. No, and if it's and vice versa. So but there are two sides of the coin, I would say. So I think junior scholars should not at all be afraid to submit a paper to JMS, because we look at the merit of the paper and not who's the author. However, writing a good scholarly paper is, in my view, a craft that can and needs to be learned. And that doesn't come across so easily. I mean, we all in our careers went through painful moments and also more joyful moments, I guess. So if you're a junior scholar and you have high aspirations and want to submit to a top journal, get help from the crowd, so to say. And there are multiple ways to do that. Go to conferences and pitch your ideas, see how they resonate with the audience. That's kind of the obvious. Either try to find a co-author who is maybe an experienced scholar who just knows how to package your ideas in a way that they are more comprehensible. So I could totally concur with Thomas that often junior scholars have the best and the freshest ideas, but they may need some help to, well, package them in a way that others find these ideas acceptable and logical and coherent. And if having a co-author is not an option, which doesn't necessarily have to be the way to go, get feedback as much as possible from peers before you submit the paper. So never submit a paper that nobody else has ever read before, right? That would be a very important advice. So ask, doesn't have to be 20, but ask at least 5 people or so to read your paper and give you feedback. And I think specifically for CMS, don't ask only CMS scholars. So maybe ask somebody from your department or a person you know who's not decidedly CMS. Hey, what do you think about my ideas? There's a lot of people that would say they are not CMS people, but they still have sympathy with CMS, like me, for instance. You know, so I would try to read your paper then from the eyes of a mainstream scholar who likes critical thought. But you can check, like, is this comprehensible? Is it coherently presented? Is it clear what others can learn from the paper and so on?
Thanks very much. I think that's great. That's great advice to ask non-CMS identifying scholars to read your paper as well. And I'm just going to butt in with my question that I had, which draws on that, because I think it links to that and it picks up on a point that Mehdi Bousaba made in the chat about, he said perhaps JMS could also ask non-critical scholars to speak to critical scholars. It can't be a one-way dialogue. I'm going to build on that and just say, are there particularly successful ways in which that critical, non-critical dialogue has been developed in JMS? Are there really good examples where that conversation has sort of really opened up?
I think what in point counterpoint, there probably is something I can't immediately bring to mind.
There's some counterpoints. I think, what is the name of the point? I don't know, but I think it's the theories of the firm, where we have one point is kind of, well, a more traditional view of the firm, and then there's a nice counterpoint by Bobby Banerjee on decolonializing management theory. So it's not purely a CMS point counterpoint, and neither purely a, well, non-CMS. This is a broad, huge field, obviously, hard to classify it that way. But one of the points of the debate is a CMS piece. And what we would ask authors in either CMS or non, like, for example, take a leadership studies, where there's critical leadership studies and then, well, mainstream leadership studies. And if authors would have a paper in that domain, we would often ask them, hey, can you make connection points, or I call it pickup points in my decision letters, where you kind of show to the reader why would they cite your paper and how, right? And then you say, well, there's a conversation within and beyond JMS on this, which takes a more critical view. How can this be relevant for your paper? And so that's more for a non-CMS paper. And the same logic is for CMS paper. Then, okay, your main contribution is to CMS, a branch of CMS research, and maybe the second or third contribution that the paper makes is to this or that other debate, which is not decisively critical. So I think this is also where the dialogue and the conversation between camps or debates takes place, by integrating literature which is CMS and not CMS into the same paper, specifically when it comes to future research, contributions, and so on.
Thank you. I see Thomas is in the background working hard with some responses in the chat and Skype, so we'll give him a breather just for a minute. I think we've got 2 questions remaining. I don't know if there are any more to come in, but I'm going to ask Christopher you to respond to the question by Darren Thomas Baker, who says that you mentioned papers that were exemplary in terms of conveying a critical theoretical message well to a mainstream management reader. Do you have any favourites? And whilst I'll give you a few seconds whilst you just to scroll through your memory there, and I'm going to line Caroline up to respond to the question by the anonymous attendee. Is there such a thing as too provocative?
It's a really interesting question, isn't it? I would say no. We like things that are provocative. However, as editors, we are making decisions along with the people who review our papers. So I would say that this is a very personal thing for me, because quite a lot of my work is considered to be provocative. I might not see it that way, but I can see that other people do. And one of the ways that you get provocative work through the system, whether it's JMS or another journal, is to make really sure that you are following the journal guidelines. This was a point that I did think about earlier when we were talking about the previous question. So a paper will come in and the person is enthusiastic, but it doesn't necessarily look like a JMS paper. So I had one that arrived the other day that was set out, the abstract was set out as a sort of poem. Now, the paper itself didn't quite fit with JMS, but immediately that puts it to the side of what a reviewer might expect from a JMS article. So it does, it absolutely does. JMS does publish things that are provocative. However, usually to get published, those papers in whatever section of the journal they're in have thought really carefully about how they can frame their argument within the guidelines of the journal. So that would be my handy tip. And look through the journal, look at what other people have done. So the piece that we've been talking about in JMS Says by Andy Prothero, she's talking about things that could be considered to be provocative. And the way that she's done it is to look really carefully at what it is that JMS Says is looking for, and obviously has no doubt worked closely with the editorial team to develop the paper. But my guess is that when it came in, the ideas presented were presented in such a way that JMS recognised it as, oh yes, this is the kind of thing that we do. So they're really basic, the way you're setting it out, the way you produce your, if it's an empirical or review paper, have a look at what others have done, have a look at what the guidelines say, have a look at what the methods section looks like. How many words go into people's methods section? Where do they go into the detail? If you've done something that's really provocative, do you need to spend a bit of time looking at your ethics, for example, and frame it in the way that it looks like a paper for JMS or whichever journal it is. And then I think you can really go to town on a provocative point.
Thanks, Caroline. That's tremendous advice. And Christopher, I don't know if you pick on that or whether...
Yeah, I was looking for some examples in the background as we were talking. So there's one where I was the handling it. It is a study by Ghazi Islam and Roberta Scarazzo, which is kind of quite critical in its orientation and kind of embeddedness in CMS research. It's on workers' rituals and new management ideology and emancipatory possibilities for rituals. That's a very nice study. Should I post this also in the chat? I think this is best. And then I think the easiest way is to, so there's kind of established CMS scholars that have published in JMS. So there's certainly many more, but those that come to mind easily are probably Rick Delbridge, Bobby Banerjee, Hugh Wilmot, and Mats Alvesen. There's also stuff that Sarah Kaplan, for example, wrote with us. They have all published in JMS, and I would suggest to kind of look for these examples specifically, depending on your particular topic, whether that's leadership or something else.
Thank you. I think that deals with a lot of the questions and has given some real insight. So I'm going to be quiet now and pass you back to the rest of the team. Thank you for your discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Christopher, Caroline, and Thomas. I was listening to the conversation, and for a moment I was lost there. I forgot that I had other responsibilities as well. Some of the key things that that spoke to me was this idea of CMS scholars not just having a conversation amongst ourselves, and I had a feeling, I don't know why, that there would be a lot of questions around JMS says, because I think as critical scholars, we probably are thinking differently. We are reflexive. We are looking at things in a bit differently. And so maybe essays is that platform. But Caroline, thank you so much about sharing about reviews. And what I think maybe everybody would take away from today is the fact that you may be writing a review, but if you're writing a review for AMR, it's very different from when you're writing a review from JMS. Just because we think it's a review doesn't mean. And so that the framing has to be, if you're writing for JMS, it has to be framed in a certain way. And we have to still remember that JMS is a general management journal, and therefore that forms an important context or an important setting in which we are having these conversations. And thank you, Thomas, for sharing all of these great platforms to get mentorship. As somebody who does come from the global south, I have also personally used some of these platforms, and I met Thomas in a different platform as a mentor. So I can say that I found the larger community to be very generous in sharing their feedback. And so for everybody out there, please do look into these opportunities, into these platforms that Thomas has shared. I have used them and I have benefited from that mentorship a lot. In the interest of time, again, thank you everyone for not just showing up, but as I said, for bringing so many interesting questions. I got lost in the conversations with the questions that were being put up. So thank you very much for being engaged through the session. A huge thank you to the team, Christopher, Caroline, Thomas. This was wonderful. Thank you for sharing all these insights with us. A huge thank you to my team as well, who were helping in the background, Laura, Alex, Richard, thank you so much. There were a couple of technical glitches, but we'll try to fix them. There were concerns about some of the resources that have been shared. We'll try to put these resources together and email to everyone. So please look out for that email. A recording of this webinar would be put up on our YouTube channel, and I'm just going to try and put the details of that as well. So hopefully you're all able to see my screen. Yep. And also quickly want to bring everyone's attention to our next event. So we keep doing these things. And the next event that we have lined up is happening on the 20th of October. So we hope to see many of you there. It's on a special issue in management learning. So please do join us for the same. And if you are interested in knowing about our upcoming events, you can go and look at Eventbrite. Our email is there as well. We are also wanting to encourage as much conversation around CMS as possible. So if you have any ideas, just today we talked about mentorship. So if you have any ideas, please feel free to write to us at cmswebinars@gmail.com. Any ideas that you have about proposing a webinar, proposing a meeting, or sort of even a writing group, anything that comes to your mind which can help our community grow together, please do write to us. You can follow us on Twitter, and of course we are there on YouTube as well, and we'll send you an email when the recording of this webinar is going to put up on YouTube. So that's all from all of us here at CMS InTouch. Once again, thank you so much for joining, and thank you especially to the team from JMS for sharing these valuable insights with us. Thank you. Have a good evening, good afternoon. Have a good week as well. Thank you.